The sky hung low with an eerie stillness over Blind Frog Ranch, a gray veil pressing down like a warning. Chad Ollinger had woken before dawn, pulled by something he couldn't name. The desert air was cooler than expected, heavy with the scent of sagebrush and the distant trace of ozone. The ground, cracked and dry from weeks without rain, whispered under his boots as he made his way toward the west fence line. They'd been scanning the land for weeks, searching, probing, chasing stories that curled and twisted like the wind through the Uinta Basin. Reports of strange energies, unexplainable readings, metal anomalies buried beneath the earth. It wasn't just treasure they were after anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. As Chad approached a rarely used ATV trail, his handheld ground-penetrating radar gave a jolt. The pulse readings spiked wildly for a moment, then steadied into something clear and defined. Hollow beneath the surface, almost cavernous. It was a pattern he'd only seen once before, in a collapsed mine shaft 2 counties over. But this was deeper, more structured. Man-made or natural, it demanded attention. The area was marked by nothing special. A flat stretch of scrub and sand, a scattering of sun-bleached rock, and a lone cottonwood that clawed at the sky with brittle limbs. Chad knelt, brushing away the top layer of dust. Beneath it, the ground looked disturbed, subtle depressions where the earth had sunk unevenly. With methodical care, he flagged the coordinates and called for the excavator. The crew wouldn't arrive until noon, but he couldn't wait. Shoveling by hand, he uncovered the edge of something harder than dirt. Rock. No, not just rock. Stone, hewn and placed with intent. A lip of some kind of structure. A buried entrance by the time the first hydraulic hiss of the excavator broke the silence. Sweat had soaked Chad's collar, and the wind had picked up, whistling with the high-pitched whine that seemed to follow them lately. Hours passed in dusty labor. Layer by layer, the machines peeled back time. Then, with a groan that seemed to echo from the depths of the past, a slab shifted. Beneath it yawned a darkness that ate the sunlight whole. It was a cave, but not just a natural hollow. The walls bore tool marks, primitive, perhaps, but unmistakable. Symbols etched into stone, spirals and lines that mirrored petroglyphs found miles from here. Something ancient had lived here, or died here. Chad climbed down with careful precision, flashlight slicing through the shadows. The air was damp, cooler than expected, carrying the metallic tang of mineral-rich stone and something else, older, mustier, like the breath of time itself. The tunnel sloped downward, rough steps cut into the rock, worn smooth with use. Roots clawed through the walls like bony fingers, and the silence pressed against his ears until even the sound of his breath felt too loud. He reached a chamber after 20 feet. A natural pocket in the earth, but again, changed by hands not his own. Stone slabs were arranged in a circle, and at the center sat a basin, carved from a single block of black rock, glistening in the light. The floor was damp, though no water dripped from the ceiling. The air felt charged, alive, like a coiled storm hiding just behind the stone. He crouched beside the basin. Inside, faint traces of something crystalline clung to the edges, salt, minerals. He scraped a sample, bagged it for testing. Then he noticed the walls. Symbols again, only these glowed faintly under the beam. Phosphorescent paint? No. These glowed from within, as if the rock itself held secrets too long buried. He pulled out his EMF reader. The needle danced erratically. Energy signatures spiked and dropped without pattern. Static began to hiss in his earpiece, even though no radio was transmitting. He turned, light arcing across the chamber, and froze. A second passage, narrower and lower, snaked away behind a curtain of roots, He hesitated only a moment before pressing forward. The tunnel constricted, the walls breathing with the heat of the earth, and then opened again into a smaller chamber. This one was different. Here, the walls were smooth, polished as if by machines, not tools. At the center lay what looked like a coffin, but made of metal. Not iron or steel, something darker, almost green-black, with no visible seams or fastenings. It hummed faintly, like it was alive. Chad didn't touch it. He circled it, filming, documenting. Strange runes were etched across its surface, lines that shimmered slightly, like oil on water. He sent the footage back to the surface for analysis, heart pounding with each step. This wasn't just an ancient burial. This was technology, or something indistinguishable from it. Outside, the sun dipped low. The sky burned gold and blood-red as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Thunder rolled. Atop the ridge, Duane stood with binoculars, watching the gathering front. He didn't know yet what Chad had found. Entirely underground, the air began to shift. The chamber pulsed with a low vibration, felt more than heard. Dust trembled across the surface of the stone coffin. The EF reader spiked to red, then died entirely. Flashlights flickered. The ground groaned. Chad backed toward the tunnel, adrenaline surging. The cave didn't want to be disturbed. Or maybe something in it didn't want to be found. He reached the upper chamber. The wind outside howled through the cave mouth, carrying with it a strange sound, like chanting, but too faint to be real. The basin at the center now shimmered with a pale light, liquid rising from nowhere, filling slowly with something that looked like mercury. He fled the cave then. Outside, the storm had arrived. Lightning slashed the sky in crooked fingers. Rain pelted the ground, steam rising as it met the hot earth. The entrance to the cave shuddered, then collapsed in a landslide of rock and dirt, sealing itself like a wound. The crew arrived minutes later, skidding to a halt as Chad stood soaked and shaking beside the smoking hole. They recovered what they could, samples, data, footage. But the entrance was gone, buried again, swallowed by the land. And the land did not seem eager to give it back. That night, Chad watched the footage alone in the control cabin. The runes on the coffin pulsed, a sequence he hadn't noticed before. A pattern, maybe even a code. He froze the frame. On the side of the basin, barely visible under the shifting light, was the shape of a frog, long limbs splayed, eyes wide and knowing. The morning broke cold and brittle across Blind Frog Ranch. Dust clung to the air like an old memory, and the sagebrush didn't sway. It simply endured. Chad Ollinger stood at the edge of a cracked ravine, one boot resting against a limestone outcrop that hadn't been there the week before. Something beneath the surface had shifted. Seismic activity had been low. Barely a blip on their instruments, but enough to trigger curiosity. And curiosity at this point had grown into obsession. The ranch had offered too many unanswered questions. Chad's mind wasn't on the surface anymore. It was underground, in the places where the light didn't reach and time had no grip. He ran his glove along the new outcrop. The stone was colder than it should have been. A fault line, maybe. A sinkhole. He moved carefully, sweeping the ground with the handheld GPR. The signal pinged back hard. A pocket beneath. Large, hollow, deep. He marked the area and began digging. The soil gave reluctantly. Each layer told a different story. Centuries of sediment and dust, sealed and forgotten. At just under 5 feet, the shovel struck resistance. Not stone, not root, something shaped. Something deliberate. He uncovered a slab, smooth-edged, circular at the ends, and darker than the surrounding rock. By midday, a full structure had emerged, a capstone of some kind, set into a mouth-like depression in the earth. The sides tapered downward. An entry point. A door. He cleared it with a brush and chisel. No hinges, no seams, no mechanisms, just the suggestion of an entrance. Sun passed its zenith and began its crawl down the sky. The wind picked up, moving like a whisper between the cottonwoods. Chad assembled a rope harness and fixed it to the excavator arm. With cautious pressure, he lowered himself into the void. Inside the shaft, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The light dimmed, swallowed by layers of dust and a tight, oppressive stillness. The walls were hewn rock, but they bore patterns, not made by natural erosion. Tool marks, symmetrical incisions, symbols embedded in stone like fossilized thoughts. 10 feet down, the shaft opened into a chamber. His boots landed softly on a mixture of sand and crushed mineral. He swept the beam of his flashlight across the walls. The chamber was circular, maybe 30 feet wide, 12 feet high. Symbols repeated themselves, spirals, jagged lines, geometric glyphs that looked like maps or instructions. A basin sat at the center, carved directly into the rock, dry but stained dark at the base. Around it, the ground formed a slight depression, as if something had sat there for years, pressing down from the inside out. He moved toward it, each step stirring up ancient dust and dead air. There were stones stacked along the far wall, seemingly random at first, but too even in shape and size. They'd been placed. Maybe an altar, maybe something else. Beneath the stones, a shallow passageway yawned. He hesitated. The GPR had only hinted at a small void. This was larger, deeper, more intentional. He crouched and entered the passage. It was tighter than the shaft, barely wide enough to crawl. The beam of the flashlight jittered against the walls as he moved. The air thinned. The smell turned earthy, almost metallic. He pushed through and emerged into a second chamber, unlike anything he'd seen before on the ranch.